Health, Psychology and Human Nature with André Sturesson. Hey friends, hope you're having a great day. Are you following me on Instagram and Facebook? Please go to Health, Psychology and Human Nature on Instagram or Facebook, or both for that matter, to get the latest episodes, inspiration and more. Please take a pause and go there. Also, if you like the episode, please share it with a friend, family member, or somebody else who you think might like it. Welcome back, friends, to Health, Psychology and Human Nature with André Sturesson, a science-focused podcast where we explore, learn, and improve our lives together. How should you live your life? Stoicism is a practically oriented philosophy which focuses on how to live a good life, but also how to improve upon yourself. And in today's episode, Professor Massimo talks about what Stoicism is, the importance in what we can and what we can't control, how to improve your character, and tips for those that want to learn more about Stoicism and want to study Stoicism. Professor Massimo, he's known for popularizing Stoicism with his TEDx talk that has been viewed more than 400,000 times, and also his short TED video about Stoicism, which has been viewed more than 4 million times. He's also written a lot of books. One of them is How to Be a Stoic, and the other, A Handbook for New Stoics. And he also has a webpage, massimopigliucci.com. Friends, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Okay, Massimo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to talking a little bit about Stoicism with you today. I think it's a fascinating subject. I saw your TED Talks about this about the subject when I was preparing for this.
Yeah, that was fun. That was actually delivered in Athens, which it's particularly appropriate since Stoicism started there.
Yeah, that's true. All right, I think we should just head right into Stoicism. But first off, I would like to just ask you a little bit about philosophy. So, if I would ask you like what philosophy is in a nutshell, what would you say then?
We could have an hour-long discussion about that.
Yeah,
that if you ask different philosophers, they will give you different answers. But broadly speaking, I think philosophy is not much a discipline in its own as much as it is an attitude or an approach to things. So philosophy is about analyzing critically and discussing the assumptions underlying human fields of inquiry and human assumptions about the world. That's why you can have a variety of applications of philosophy. You can have philosophy of science, for instance, which is interested in figuring out how science works and when it doesn't work, why it doesn't work. We have philosophy of mind, which is interested in exploring concepts concerning consciousness and the like. And then, of course, you have metaphysics, which is the branch of philosophy that deals with how we think about how the world hangs together. We have ethics, which is the branch of philosophy that thinks about how we behave toward each other. So it's really more of a method or an approach than a particular discipline. Philosophy kind of, in my mind at least, underlines every other discipline. It is relevant to pretty much every other specific discipline. It's the broadest field you can think of. You can do philosophy of pretty much anything you can think of.
Right. I heard you say in a video of yours that you philosophers, you joke about at least all of us philosophers have all the questions.
That's right. Yeah, and that's it is a joke, but it kind of gets things right in the sense that often people ask, well, why doesn't philosophy make progress, for instance, like science does? And on the one hand, it's not actually true that philosophy doesn't make progress. It does make progress in a way, however, that is different from science, and that is simply because science is in a kind of different business, right? Science is in the business of discovering things about the world. And therefore, what counts as progress is, if we learn something new about the world and how the world works, that's progress in science. But philosophy is in the business of analyzing concepts and clarifying things. So we make progress by asking questions more than by delivering answers, right? For instance, let me give you a specific example. If we're talking about ethics, for instance, which, it's a broad field that deals with what is right and wrong and how to live your life and that sort of stuff, there isn't going to be one single answer that is going to fit every situation. But there is going to be a field of inquiry that says, look, there are certain ways of thinking about ethics that don't work very well, and other ways that do work very well. And so let's talk about, let's ask the right questions and trying to figure out to clarify our mind about how to think about ethics. But we're never going to come up with a single answer like in the way science does, because there is no single answer. It's not a failure. What I'm saying is it's not a failure of philosophy. It's just the way the world works.
Okay, I think perhaps then we should head it right into Stoicism then. So, I mean, you have talked a lot about Stoicism, you've written about Stoicism. What is Stoicism?
Right, so Stoicism is an ancient Greek-Roman philosophy, and I often think of it as kind of the Western equivalent of Buddhism for a number of reasons, mostly because their ethical precepts are very similar. Their approach to how to live your life is actually very similar, even though their background metaphysical assumptions are very different. For instance, Buddhists believe in reincarnation, karma, and that sort of metaphysical concepts. The Stoics don't, because they're materialists. They just think that the world is made of stuff, and that's about it. Which means that when we die, we die. That's the end of the story. But in terms of ethics, which is the most important part, in terms of how to live your life, they actually are very similar. So Stoicism is a philosophy of life. It is something that you don't just study theoretically. In fact, if you just do the theory, you're kind of missing the point. You have to practice it. You have to do it every day. In a sense, it's an example of a philosophy of life, just like a lot of religions are. Stoicism is not a religion, but I think every religion is also a philosophy of life. I think of a philosophy of life as having 2 or 3 components. One is a metaphysics, that is an account of how the world kind of hangs together. 2 is an ethics, an account of how we should behave in the world. And 3, often, but not always, there is a set of exercises or practical things you can do in order to learn how to live your life in that way. So, for instance, to give you an example, according to Christianity has a metaphysics, of course. It says that the world was created by God that is outside of time and space, and who is a benevolent and omnipotent God. That's the metaphysics. The ethics is you should behave in the way in which either the 10 Commandments say, if you're going for the Old Testament, or by emulating Jesus if you're going by the New Testament. And in terms of practices, you're supposed to go to church regularly, read the sacred texts and reflect on the Gospels, and then pray and that sort of stuff. So similarly, Stoicism has a metaphysics. As I said, it is a materialist metaphysics. The Stoics think that the universe is made of stuff, and that cause and effect are the basic way in which the world works. And then there is an ethics, which we're probably going to talk about in a few minutes, but which is based on the notion, for instance, that you should be trying to become the best human being that you can. That is, you should become virtuous, and being virtuous means helping other people. And then there is a set of practices. There are types of meditations, there are written exercises that you do, there are mindful exercises that you do, and that sort of stuff. So Stoicism is just a particular type of philosophy of life, just like Buddhism, Christianity, and a bunch of others.
Right, interesting. So it's a lot about the world, how everything is working, and it's about how you should live, and it's also like practical things that you can do then in your life to improve your life, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay. Interesting. And you alluded to this just a minute ago about the virtues and everything. So I would like to ask you, what is a well-lived life according to the Stoics or the Stoicism?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is where the different philosophies of life, diverge and disagree. Buddhism tells you one thing, Christianity tells you another. I don't know, Epicureanism tells you a third, and so on and so forth. As far as the Stoics are concerned, a good human life is essentially a life of in which you're working toward improving your character, and you're working toward improving what they call the human cosmopolis, that is the human society at large. So having a good life has nothing to do with being rich or poor. It doesn't have anything to do with being, smart or not smart, or educated or not educated, or famous or non-famous. It has to do with making yourself, doing the best to become a better person, and do your best in order to be helpful to others.
Right, and this part about becoming a better person, how do you become a better person according to Stoicism?
Well, just like in other religions and philosophies, you do it in two ways. On the one hand, you study the theory. You have to understand what the philosophy underlying Stoicism actually is, and then you practice. So, for instance, let me give you an example of a theoretical precept and how you practice it. One of the fundamental theoretical points of Stoicism is the so-called dichotomy of control. This is the notion that, as Epictetus, who was a first-century Stoic philosopher, puts it, some things are up to us and other things are not up to us, meaning that you can divide the world in things that you actually control, and then there are other things that you don't control. And what you should do, according to the Stoics, is to focus on the things you do control and then take the rest as it comes. Develop an attitude of sort of equanimity toward outcomes. So you should focus on your own efforts, in other words, because those are the ones you control. And then whatever it will be, and you accept that the universe sometimes works in your way and sometimes it doesn't work in your way. So that's the theory. Now, how do you practice this? Well, every time you're about to make a decision or you're about to sort of tackle a new situation, you ask yourself, you stop for a moment and you ask yourself, well, what exactly is under my control here and what is not? So let me give a specific example. Suppose that tomorrow morning I'm going to go for a job interview, for instance. Right. Actually, let me give you a real example.
Yeah.
Because since I have a job, so I'm not going to go for a job interview. But after we finish our chat today, I'm going to take the train and go to Boston, where I'm going to participate to the Northeast Modern Language Association conference, because Friday I'm going to deliver a talk on neo-Stoicism, which was the a Renaissance period during which Stoicism became popular again. Okay, great. So then the question is going to be, right? So Friday morning, I will wake up and I will have to tackle this issue of, okay, in a few hours I'm giving a talk. So the question then, as a Stoic, is I'm going to be reflecting for a few minutes that morning about, okay, what kind of things are under my control here and what kind of things are not under my control. Well, under my control is to have prepared as much as I could to deliver a good presentation, right? So I worked on my slides, I worked on my text and everything. Under my control is to review one more time before the actual delivery if everything is okay, if the slides are working, if the talk makes sense, it's coherent, etc. Right? I can also work what is under my control is also on working to prepare myself mentally, focus. Maybe if I need to do some breathing exercises or something like that, I can do that. Those are all things under my control. What is it that is not under my control? Well, computer glitches, for instance. It could very well be that I go to the conference room and the computer projection is not going to work. So I need to be prepared for that. Do I have a backup plan? Right? Because I can't count on the fact that technology is going to work. I've been to plenty of conferences, and I know for experience that sometimes things don't work out. So am I going to be okay with that? Do I have a backup plan? And the answer is yes, I do. What else is not under my control? But the number of people that are going to show up to the session. I would like to be, of course, presenting a paper in front of a good number of people, because I would like to have an audience where there's going to be an interesting Q&A, and maybe I'm gonna learn something from the questions that people are going to ask. But that's not under my control. I have no control over how many people are going to show up. and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of exercise you do, and you do it for everything that is relevant, important in your life that's going to happen during a particular day. You get up in the morning basically, and you do these meditation about thinking ahead of stuff, and you always ask yourself, what is it under my control and what is not. This works also after you experience a setback or a problem. Like for instance, a few years ago, I was in Rome and I boarded a crowded subway, and somebody picked my pockets and got away with my wallet. So I immediately thought, okay, what is it that's under my control here? If I get upset and I start fuming about this, then that's not going to help, because it's not going to bring back the wallet. I cannot go after the thief because he's already left the subway. And so what is it I can do? Well, fortunately, I still have my phone, so I can call my credit card companies and stop the credit cards so that no further damage is going to be done. Also, what is under my control is I'm already on the subway. I'm on my way to meet my brother, so my brother can lend me some cash so that we can have dinner together as we had anticipated tonight. And so within a few minutes, I was already handling the situation very nicely, and there was no further drawback, because it's like I immediately focused on what is it that I could do, and I trained my mind to push away thoughts that are not useful. Like, oh, damn it, this happened, and it was so stupid, and so people are so bad. It's like, well, none of that helps. So to indulge in that kind of thought is entirely unhelpful. In fact, it's damaging, because you simply get upset and you don't think carefully and clearly about what you should do.
Right. One thing that I find very interesting about what you can and what you can't control is how it's linked to self-worth. I'm not sure if it was you. I think it was you in some video that I saw that said something about that you shouldn't link what you cannot control to your self-worth. You should link what you can control to your self-worth instead. Could you talk a little bit about that, perhaps?
That's right. So Epictetus says that the key to freedom is to realize that you should be focusing, exactly as you said, on the things that are under your control, and then take the rest as it comes. So here's what it means. If my goal in life, if one of my major goals in life is to become a better person, let's say, right, to work on my character, that's under my control. And so if my self-worth is connected to self-improvement, hey, that's up to me. So I'm actually, I'm going to be happy, and I'm going to be, free, because nobody can actually hinder me from that. Nobody can sort of get in the way of me working on my character. On the other hand, if my goal in life, if my self-worth is, let's say, tied up with becoming a famous writer, let's say, right, then that is effectively deputizing my happiness to external circumstances, because it's not up to me. I can do the best writing I can, obviously, that is up under my control. But whether my books are going to be bestsellers or not, whether the BBC is going to call me up for an interview or not, that's not up to me at all. And so if my self-worth is bound up into that kind of thing, in that kind of external validation, then I'm putting my happiness in the hands of fate, for one thing. And also, I'm going to become a slave, those are Epictetus' words, of whoever has the power to grant me that thing, right? So I'm going to be a slave of reporters, or I'm going to be a slave of the public that buys my books, or the slave of people who invite me to give talks, and so on and so forth. And why would I want to do that? So that in that sense, if you make this distinction based on the dichotomy of control between what is up to you and what is not up to you, and you focus on the first and then take the rest as it comes, you are guaranteed to actually succeed, because it's all about your efforts, not about the outcomes, and you do control your efforts. And B, you're going to be free. You're not going to be under anybody else's control, because you're training yourself to say, well, if other people or external circumstances are going my way, that's great. If they're not, that's fine anyway, because my self-worth is not bound up in that.
Yeah, I think that is something that is really interesting, and something that a lot of people also are affected by. I mean, me included. When you're doing a talk, or if you're doing something else, then I think it's quite easy to get affected by the actual result, even if you can, like, even if it's in your control or not.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes natural because we're trained since we're kids to care about outcomes, right? We're told that, by our parents, we're told that to succeed means to get a good job, to make money, to, become famous or something like that. We are told by media, by movies, by television. Everybody keeps telling us these kinds of things, and that is why it comes natural to us, and that is why it requires quite a bit of sustained effort to basically untrain yourself, to retrain yourself in a different fashion. But that is one of the things that Stoicism has in common with other philosophies. Like, I mean, the Christians or Buddhists would agree with the Stoics that a meaningful life, a happy life, is not bound up in externals, in outside things. It comes from within. It comes from your own efforts. But it is a question of training. You just have to, it takes time. And certainly, I cannot claim, even though I've been training as a Stoic for now a number of years now, I certainly cannot claim to have reached, anything like a perfection in that area. I mean, sometimes I still do get upset when outside things don't go my way. But I'm now been practicing long enough that almost immediately, kind of automatically, the thought comes to my mind and says, wait a minute, why are you getting upset about this? This was not under your control. This has not got nothing to do with your efforts, and therefore it's got nothing to do with your worth as a person. And it does help. I mean, it calms me down immediately and refocuses my thoughts about in a more productive way.
Right. I also really think that it really makes a difference. I mean, let's say that it's one person who really is only focused on, let's say, how many books the person sells, and the other person is just focused about, I'm going to try to do the best work that I can. I mean, those two focuses also, I think, really has an effect on how the person perceives like life, and also how the person perceives, I mean how they feel as well.
Yes, absolutely. It does have a big impact on how you think about the world and on your emotional responses to what happens. And also, by the way, one good way to become successful, let's say, at writing books is to try to actually do your best to write a good book.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like your effort. I mean, it's not like the Stoics are saying that your efforts are completely decoupled from your outcomes. Obviously, the more of a good effort you make of things, the more likely you are to succeed. So long as you keep in mind that there is never a guarantee to succeed, because success does not depend entirely on you. It depends on external circumstances, right? I mean, I can write a great book and then about, let's say, Stoicism, but if people are not interested in Stoicism, they're not going to buy it. Which is fine. I write books that I want to write. I don't write books that I think people are going to buy.
Yeah,
and that is the difference in the attitude.
Exactly. Do you have any more like examples? I think it's very good for people to be able to understand this, what we can and we can't control, and perhaps also use it if we like learn more about some examples. Do you have any other examples of how this can be used, what we can and what we can't control?
Sure. Yeah. So one is the one that I was about to give you earlier, and then I thought that it would be better to actually talk about something that is about to happen to me. But let's say you go up for a job interview. What comes natural is to be worried about the outcome of the interview. Right? Will I get the job or will I not get the job? Well, that's not up to you. I mean, you can influence it, of course. When I say it's not up to you, I mean you don't completely control it. Obviously, you can influence that outcome because you're a participant in the process. But ultimately, it's not up to you because you can make the best effort that you can. They can be what is under your control is to prepare the best CV that you can. Prepare for the interview, learn about the company. Try to anticipate the kind of questions you're going to get. All that sort of stuff. You can prepare also by try to have a good night's sleep. The night before, don't drink too much or anything like that. Wake up at a reasonable time, all refreshed and ready to go. Pick appropriate dressing for clothes for the situation. All of that sort of stuff. That's up to you. But once you get to the interview, The actual outcome is not up to you. It depends on the competition you had. Maybe somebody else is going to get the job because they're just better than you are at that job. Or maybe the interviewer is not having a good day, and because he got his own problems and he takes it on you, and so the interview doesn't go well. There could be all sorts of reasons. Or maybe you just even get there late because you took public transportation and there was a strike that day, and so you get there late and you lose the job on that ground. So again, you're making this distinction between what is it that it's up to me that I control, and what is it that I don't. And you are going to be okay from the get-go with whatever outcome, because you know that if you don't get the job, that's not your fault, because you did your best. And you should be happy and at peace with the fact that you did your best. So long as you did your best, that's it, end the story. Sometimes you will get the job, sometimes you won't. And if you don't get the job, it's not a catastrophe. It's not the end of the world. There will be other jobs. There will be other opportunities, in the future. Or let me give you one more example in terms of sort of personal relationships. Like, suppose you go on a date, or you are already in a relationship. You want the other person to like you, or you want the other person to love you. Well, that's not up to you. That's up to them. Yeah. What is up to you is what is up to you is to be a likable person or a lovable person, to be the kind of person that your partner might want to stick around with because you're good, because you're treating her or him well, because you are supportive, because you are understanding, that sort of stuff. All of those things are up to you. But whether the other person reciprocates or not, whether the other person stays or leaves, that's not up to you. But if let's say if she does leave, if there's a breakup, let's say even a long-term relationship, people tend to be crushed by that. But the Stoic attitude there is like, well, you knew from the get-go that this wasn't under your control. Did you do your best? Yes. Right. Well then, yeah. There's nothing else you can do about it. And guess what? Again, it's not the end of the world. People survive breakups. I mean, one of the things that Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic practitioner, the Roman emperor, 2nd century Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius kept telling himself that, whatever is happening to you, no matter how bad it may seem in the moment, it has happened to countless people before, and they survived it. And they, some people even thrived on it. It's not like you are the only one who's not going to get a job, or the only one who's going to go through a breakup, or the only one who's going to get sick, or anything like that. Or in fact, if the ultimate test, you're not the only one who's going to die. We're all going to die one of these days. Yeah. And so that's the attitude is, well, remind yourself that if other people have been able to cope with those situations in a good way, in a constructive way, why the hell shouldn't you be able to do the same?
Right. And I think it's, two things. So one is, if you're always trying to do your best, like let's say you're doing your best in a relationship, you're really trying to be kind and be good to your partner, then it's a lot more likely that your relationship actually will be a good one. And, exactly. And also, like, if it actually ends, then I guess, it's not as likely that it will end, but if it ends, then, as you said, then that probably won't affect you as much, because then you actually done what you can.
Right, you have nothing to regret. Now, let's take a little bit more complicated case, which is, well, you thought you were doing your best, let's say, during a relationship, but in fact you didn't really. That there was a number of things that you got angry a little too often.
You wore the wrong shirt.
Yeah, you wore the wrong shirt, or you made snarky comments to your partner, whatever it is. Well, even in that case. Right? The Stoic attitude in that case is, well, all right, again, what is under your control here? Can you go back in time and change what you did? Obviously not, because the past is not under your control, right? So to indulge in sort of regret and beat yourself up and say, oh, I should have done this, or I should have done that, or I should not have done this, or should not have done that, that's useless. That's not going to be helpful, because you cannot go back in time and change things. What you can do is to reflect on these things and learn from your own past mistakes and say, oh, so it turns out I thought I was doing my best, but in fact there was this thing, that thing, and that other thing that I could have done better. Well, great. So lesson learned. Next time I'm going to do better, right? So even if you fail because you did not, in fact, do your best, The Stoic attitude is still, well, no reason to despair there either. You just want to learn from the experience. We're all imperfect. None of us is a sage, and therefore we all make mistakes. And so long as you are ready to A, acknowledge the mistake, and B, learn from it, then it was still a positive experience.
Right, interesting. I think if we perhaps could go back a little bit to how to live your life according to Stoicism, because what you said there was that one of the things was that you were supposed to improve upon yourself. I was wondering about the virtues, because I've heard a lot about the Stoic virtues as well. Perhaps if we could talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So the Stoics recognized four fundamental, what they call cardinal virtues. And these were practical wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Now, I'm going to say in a minute what exactly they are, but let's talk for a second first about why bring up this whole virtue thing in the first place. Turns out that the concept of virtue is actually pretty much a human universal. Every culture, at least every literate culture, that is every culture with a written language that we've looked at, has the concept of virtue. And interestingly, most cultures tend to focus on the same subset of virtues, not necessarily the four Stoic ones, but something close to it. Sometimes it's not four, it's 5 or 6, but they're pretty much that they're very close. So every culture seems to think that justice is a virtue. Every culture seems to think that temperance is a virtue, and so on and so forth. So the notion is, therefore, in Stoicism in particular, to use the virtues as kind of a framework, as a compass to orient yourself in life. Essentially, what you should do every time you're about to do something, you should ask yourself, okay, is this a wise thing to do? Is this a courageous thing to do? Is this a temperate thing to do? And is that a just thing to do? And if the answer is yes, go for it. If the answer is no to any of those, then refrain. Essentially, that's how you use the virtues.
But you won't do anything then?
No, I disagree.
No, I'm kidding.
I disagree. Yeah. But you will do much less. That's true.
Yeah, for sure.
And in my mind, you will make a lot of fewer mistakes for that matter. That's the point. Now let's talk about the four virtues in particular. The first one, it's a little. The name is a little unwieldy. Practical wisdom. The Greek word there is phronesis, and sometimes it is translated as prudence. Unfortunately, prudence these days in English just means that, if you're prudent, it just means you're not taking risks. And that is not what the Stoics meant. Practical wisdom essentially is the knowledge of what is good for you and what is not good for you. Okay? So it's a kind of wisdom, it's a kind of knowledge, but it's practical because it has immediate obvious applications. Now, in the case of the Stoics, the answer to the question of what is good for me and what is not good for me is actually very simple. The Stoics think that the only things that are truly good for me are my own good judgments and my own good decisions to act. And the only things that are truly bad for me are my own bad judgments and my own bad decisions to act.
Could you explain those two a little bit more? So I don't completely understand those.
Yeah. So we tend to think that a lot of external things are good or bad, right? We tend to say, for instance, that wealth is good and poverty is bad. We tend to say that health is good and sickness is bad. We tend to say that fame is good and being ignored by other people is bad, and so on and so forth, right? For the Stoics, those things are not good or bad. They're actually indifferent, meaning that they don't make any difference to your own moral character. They don't make you a better person or a worse person. If you say something like, hey, I'm rich, therefore I'm a good person, that's a nonsense, right? It doesn't follow logically. The fact that you're rich doesn't make you a good person. And similarly, the fact that you're poor doesn't make you a bad person. So those things are indifferent in that sense, that they do not make you a good or a bad person. They are, however, preferred or dispreferred, meaning that it does make sense, other things being equal, for you to say, hey, I'd rather be wealthy than poor. So long, however, as you do that, as you pursue wealth in a way that doesn't affect you negatively from a moral perspective. In other words, in a way that doesn't take advantage of other people. If you become wealthy by taking advantage of other people, or if you become wealthy and then you use your money in order to exploit other people, that's not good. But if you use your wealth correctly, wisely, and if you achieve your wealth by means that are not unethical, then you're fine. Now, back to the knowledge of good and evil, or good and bad stuff. So all externals fall into the category of morally indifferent. The only things that are actually of our concern are the things that are up to me. And those are my judgments and my decision to act or not to act. So what I want to do in life is to arrive at good judgments and to decide to act in a good way. And what I don't want to do is to arrive at bad judgments and to act in a bad way. That is, basically, in a nutshell, is practical wisdom according to the Stoics, the ability to arrive at good decisions.
Right. So it's making good decisions and like doing good behaviors, kind of.
Correct. So that's practical wisdom. Okay. It's the virtue that tells you what is a good decision and what is a good behavior. Now, courage is really moral courage. It's not just I'm okay with going up against physical danger or something like that. That's not courage in the Stoic sense. Maybe we could refer to that as bravery or something like that, but it's not courage. Courage is the courage to do the right thing. And I'll give you an example in a minute of how all these virtues come together. But so courage is the attitude that allows you to stand up to situations and to do the right thing. Justice is the third virtue, and it's the one that tells you what the right thing to do actually is. Not for you, that's practical wisdom, but for others. What is it to be just toward others?
Right.
How do you want to treat other people? And then finally, temperance is the virtue that tells you that you should be able to do things in right measure, neither too much nor too little. Okay, neither over the top, nor not enough. Now, let me give you a specific example where all the four virtues come together. Let's say that I'm at work and I see a coworker that is being harassed by my boss. Okay. The question that I face is, well, should I intervene? Should I say something in defense of my coworker? Well, practical wisdom tells you that yes, you should, because doing the right thing, intervening on behalf of your coworker, is actually good for your own character. It improves your character. It makes you a better person. Okay. So in terms of practical wisdom, the answer is yes, you should. In terms of courage, well, yes, it will take courage to stand up to the boss, because there may be consequences that I'm going to face, right? The boss is not going to like me, or he's going to again fire me or something like that, or reprimand me. So it will take courage. Is it the just thing to do toward other people? Yes, it is, because my coworker will be presumably glad that I am going to stand up for him or her, and I expect my coworkers to do the same for me if I were in that situation. So it is also the just thing to do. What about temperance? Well, you want to stand up to your boss, but you want to do it in a temperate way. You don't want to do too little, like, for instance, muttering a comment under your breath so that it doesn't hear you. That's too little. That's not intervening, right? That's just not doing anything. But you also don't want to just go up to him and punch him on the nose, because that seems like an overreaction, right? That's too much. So what you want to do is to figure out what is the temperate way to intervene, and to firmly go to the boss and say, hey, I don't think this is the right thing to do, and here is why. That is the temperate action. So now what we've done is you were facing a situation, you were at your job, and you saw your boss harassing your coworker, and you immediately ask yourself the four questions. Well, if I intervene, is this the wise thing to do? Is this the courageous thing to do? Is this the temperate thing to do? And is that the just thing to do? And since the answer was yes to all four, then you intervene.
Right. So
that's the notion.
So it's about like doing the right thing, even if it's hard, and standing up for others, and also like doing it in a not like in a way that is not too much and not too little.
Correct. Exactly. And imagine what would happen in life if you did that every single time you had to do something. Right? Every occasion, you just automatically train yourself to automatically think in those terms. Instead of just doing things, you just stop for a minute and think about them and say, well, is this really a good thing to do or not? Is it a virtuous thing to do or not? And if the answer is no, you don't do it. Now, as you were saying earlier, it will turn out that you're going to do much less, but you're going to do much better, right?
Yeah, true.
You're going to do less, but better.
True, yeah. I was also interested to learn a little bit more, perhaps about Apatheia, and I think if we could talk about that a little bit, what that is, and maybe we can start with that. So, what is Apatheia?
So, Apatheia is a Greek word that actually is the root of the English word apathy, although it means something different. So, today, if you're apathic, it just means you can't be bothered doing anything, right? You're just lazy. For the ancient Greeks, the word apatheia meant that you are free from the negative emotions. Pathos, which is part of the word apatheia, means literally negative emotions, destructive emotions, things like fear, anger, hatred, things like that. The interesting bit about Apatheia in Stoic philosophy is that one of the goals of Stoicism is to train ourselves to shift our emotional spectrum away from negative, destructive emotions that are not good for us and toward positively cultivating good emotions, constructive emotions, such as love, joy, a sense of justice. So this addresses right there, for instance, one of the stereotypes about Stoics, right? Stoics are often thought of as people who try to suppress emotions. That's not quite true. What we're trying to do is to move away from negative emotions, but also to embrace the positive emotions. The notion being that your life is going to be better if you embrace joy and love and justice, and if you stay away from hatred, anger, and fear, that sort of stuff. And I think you can hardly argue against that sort of attempt. So Apatheia is exactly this. It's trying to reach a situation where you're not in the thralls of negative emotions anymore. Now, how do you do that? You cannot suppress a negative emotion. Let's pick on the quintessential negative emotion, which is anger. Seneca, who was a first century BCE Stoic philosopher, wrote a whole book on anger. And that book actually still contains advice that is, pretty much endorsed by the American Psychological Association today. 2,000 years later, we're still dealing with anger management, basically, and we're doing it pretty much in the way in the way Seneca was doing it. So for the Stoics, anger is a very destructive emotion. If you do something in the thrall of anger while you are angry, you're probably going to regret it, even if your anger was justified, even if it was an injustice that was done to you or your family or something like that makes you angry. If you act while you're angry, you're probably going to regret it, because you're going to be reacting violently or overreacting or simply not reacting particularly well. And so that's why you want to get away from anger. However, you cannot suppress anger. In fact, you cannot suppress any emotion. And therefore, how do you do it? Well, Seneca says, all right, first of all, you train yourself to pay attention to what's happening inside you. Anger, according to Seneca, goes through 3 phases. The first phase, or what we might call proto-anger, is that kind of internal feeling of swelling that you feel, that you experience when you're about to become angry. Right? This it's in physiological terms is that rush of adrenaline that comes to inside you when you're about to, something is wrong and you're about to get angry. Okay, that one you can't do anything about. Seneca says that's just an automatic reaction that human beings have, as animals, and there's nothing you can do about it. Just let it happen, because if you try to fight it, it's just not going to work. Then there is a second window, short window, during which you're basically beginning to think about why you're angry, and you're telling yourself a story. Oh, I'm angry because that jerk cut me off on the highway, and look what a bad person he is. I should do something about it. This is your internal dialogue, basically, that attempts to justify the anger and to prepare you for action. And then the third phase is when now you're completely overrun with anger. You're not thinking anymore. You're just going after whatever it is. In this case, the other driver. You become obsessed with honking at him or cutting him off or something like that. Now, what Seneca says is you have very little control over all of these phases. But the second phase, the one where you start talking to yourself, engaging in a sort of internal monologue about your anger, that's when you can disengage. That is the short window of time when you can recognize what's happening and say, oh crap, I'm getting angry. And this is not good in general. So let me step outside of it. And it means literally step outside. He says, when the thing to do there is not to, again, try to suppress it or trying to talk to yourself or anything like that. Don't do that. You just need to go out for a walk or take some deep breaths or go to the restroom and disengage from the situation or count until 20 or tell yourself silently and slowly the alphabet or anything that will calm you down physiologically. After that happens, after you calm yourself down, then is the time to engage your internal monologue and say to yourself, wait a minute, why am I getting upset about this thing? Okay, so the guy cut me off on the highway. So what? I'm alive, I'm fine, nothing happened. Let him do it. Who cares? He's already gone, and I'm not the worse for it. Besides, you should tell yourself, you really don't know why other people do what they do. Maybe the guy had to rush to the hospital because his wife was delivering a baby. Well, how do you know? There's no way for you to know. You don't know that he's a jerk. That was an unlicensed inference. This is something, he engaged in a behavior you didn't like, but then you immediately attributed to him a certain kind of motivation. So you don't know. You don't know the person. You have no idea why he's doing what he's doing. Maybe he's a jerk. Maybe he's not. Maybe he has very good reasons to do what he's doing. It's none of your concern. It doesn't make you, it doesn't affect your life. It doesn't make you any worse than you were before. So this is the Stoic approach to anger. Right? The first one is to realize that you cannot stop the emotion. Therefore, you disengage from the situation. You give yourself time to breathe, time to what modern psychologists call cognitive distancing. Right? You sort of take a distance from your emotion, you let it calm down, and once it's calmed down, once it's sort of under, come back to a normal situation, then you engage yourself and say to yourself, hey, what's going on here? Why was I so upset?
Right. I think it's really interesting about what you just talked about we're focusing on like the positive emotions and then how to deal with the harder emotions. I think also before we head off, I think it would be very interesting also for beginners who have never heard about Stoicism before to find out where you could go to learn more about this stuff. So do you have any recommendations when it comes to books, web pages, YouTube channels, or anything else?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. Over the last few years, a lot of resources have been put out. And if you don't mind, at the cost of sounding a little bit self-important, I'm going to start with my own stuff.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
So I have a blog that is now archived, but it has hundreds and hundreds of posts. That's called How to Be a Stoic. You can go there by go to howtobeastoic.org, and it has hundreds of articles on both the theory of Stoicism and as well as the sort of practice. I've written 2 books on the topic. One is called How to Be a Stoic, which is a kind of a general introduction to the topic. It's for people, as you say, that don't know anything about Stoicism, and it has a chapter about practice and how to actually day-to-day practicing Stoicism. But I also co-wrote a book more recently with my friend Greg Lopez. It's called A Handbook for New Stoics, and that one is almost entirely practice. So if you're actually serious about trying to incorporate Stoicism into your life, we actually present 52 exercises that you could do if you don't want to commit to the entire 52 exercise set, because that's a big commitment. Right at the beginning of the book, we actually provide a shortcut, and we say, okay, these are the exercises that you really want to try first to see if it actually works for you. So those are some resources. But there's a lot of other good books out there. You can pick up anything pretty much by Donald Robertson, whose latest book is entitled How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, and it's about Marcus Aurelius, but it's also about practice, because Don is a cognitive behavioral therapist, and cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very evidence-based, successful kind of psychotherapy, was actually inspired by Stoicism, by Stoic techniques back when it started in the 1960s. So that book or anything else pretty much by Don is good. There is a series of books by William Irvine, the latest of which is called The Stoic Challenge. And it's very interesting. It's how to it really explores in detail one particular technique for Stoic practice and to how to deal with setbacks and problems. And that technique is based on the psychological the effect that psychologists modern psychologists call the framing effect, and the fact that we can train ourselves to think of the same exact situation in different ways, and that makes a huge difference in terms of our attitudes, our emotions, etc. But pretty much anything else that Bill Irvine has written is also recommended. John Sellers is another author that I highly recommend. In particular, two books. One is called simply Stoicism, and it's a general introduction, but very well done to the theory and history of Stoic philosophy. The other one is called The Art of Living, and although it's a little bit technical, it also is a very, very good exploration of philosophy in general and Stoicism in particular as an art of living, as a practice, as a way to actually live your life. You can also find a number of resources online other than my blog that I mentioned earlier. There is a place called modernstoicism.com. Modern Stoicism is a multi-authored blog and set of resources. These are the people that organize every year the Stoic and international events, as well as Stoic Week, which is a week during which you can sign up and sort of practice, try it out, Stoicism, and see if it works for you. So that's modernstoicism.com, I think. There is a large Facebook group devoted to Stoicism, which is facilitated by Don Robertson, and I contribute almost every day there as well. And then there are more specific Facebook groups. For instance, if you're in a different country outside the United States, I run an Italian group, for instance, in Italian language, but there's a bunch of others in different nations. And also, I should mention something called the Stoic Fellowship. You can go online and look it up. The Stoic Fellowship is basically a registry of local groups and individuals who practice Stoicism. So if you want to get in touch with people in your own area that practice Stoicism, or want to start a group or want to join a group, then go to the Stoic Fellowship, and you can register there. And they have a map basically of the world where all these locations are highlighted, and you can click on your country and see what's there.
Cool. Massimo, if people would like to see more of your stuff, where can they find you online except for your webpage?
So I can be found at massimopigliucci.com. So my first name, last name .com. It's one word, and you can find there pretty much everything I do. It's a kind of a portal to all my podcasts and articles and books and everything else. And you can also follow me on Twitter, and the handle there is mpigliucci, MPIGLIUCCI.
Perfect. Massimo, it was a real pleasure talking to you. Big thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Okay, take care. Hey, friend. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I really need your help. I'm trying to get my podcast out there. So I was wondering if you could help me by leaving a positive rating and a review on your Apple device or the podcast player that you're using. That really helps getting the show more visible on iTunes and other players. And if you don't know how it's done, then YouTube has great videos, so you can search there. All right, that's it. Take care.